The official report states that we lost the drone due to a propeller malfunction, a pilot error caused by an unpredictable gust of wind in a mountain gorge. The $40,000 drone has been written off. The Black Bear Migration Study project has been temporarily suspended. All of this is dry, precise, and completely false. The truth is that it was shot down. Shot down from a height of 300 feet by a precisely thrown rock. Both Mike and I know who did it. And since that day, I haven't been able to sleep soundly, because now I know what lurks in the deepest forests of the Appalachians. My name is Jeffrey Miller. I'm a field biologist and have been working for the National Park Service for 12 years. My specialty is large mammals. Mike Daniels, my partner, is a technical specialist, a genius when it comes to drones and remote monitoring systems. On October 28, 2023, we set up camp in Sector Gamma 7 of Pisgah National Park in North Carolina. This is one of the most remote areas where tourists rarely venture, and park rangers visit no more than once a year. It's the perfect location for our project. The goal was to set up a network of sensors and conduct preliminary aerial reconnaissance using our new Argus 4 drone. This isn't a toy from a store, but a military-grade device adapted for civilian use, with virtually silent propellers, a flight time of up to 2 hours, and, most importantly, a thermal imaging camera with incredible resolution. Our task was to track the bears' migration routes before they went into hibernation and map their movements. It was routine, but fascinating work. The first 3 days went according to plan. We set up camp in a small clearing by a stream and installed our equipment. The weather was cold but clear. During the day, Mike and I walked around the area, setting up camera traps and seismic sensors. As twilight fell, it was his time to shine. Mike launched Argus into the air, and we sat in a warm tent with a generator, watching the forest's nightlife unfold on a laptop screen for hours. The thermal silhouettes of the animals against the backdrop of the cooling ground looked like ghostly white figures. We saw deer, coyotes, raccoons, and spotted bears several times. Everything was going smoothly. Data was being collected, and the maps were filling up. On the fourth night, everything changed. Around 2 a.m., while I was dozing, Mike was flying the drone along a pre-planned route over the northern ridge, about 5 miles from our camp. Suddenly, he gave me a light nudge in the side. "Jeff, look at this." I sat up and stared at the screen. On the black and white screen of the thermal imager, amid a few scattered white dots, a group of large thermal signatures was visible, at least 6 of them. They were moving down a slope covered in dense forest. "Bears?" I asked, though I knew right away that they weren't. The silhouettes were elongated and upright, moving on 2 legs in an orderly chain, keeping their distance from one another. These couldn't be people. No group of tourists would venture into this area at night without proper gear. The temperature outside was 38 degrees Fahrenheit. In such cold weather, they would have been visible if they weren't wearing appropriate clothing, but the outlines were too sharp, with no blurred areas. Mike zoomed in on the image. The quality deteriorated slightly, but even so, it was clear that these were bipedal creatures, tall and massive. He ran a software analysis of their sizes based on the height of the trees and the terrain. The result made me hold my breath. The leader of the group was about 9 feet tall. "What the hell?" Mike, his fingers flying over the keyboard, began checking the calibration and comparing the data with the topographic map. We assumed it was a glitch in the sensor or a distortion caused by the terrain, but deep down we didn't really believe it. We both knew the equipment was working flawlessly, and we watched in silence as the group of creatures crossed a small ravine and began climbing the opposite slope. Their movements were smooth and confident, utterly inhuman for such rugged terrain in complete darkness. They weren't using flashlights. They moved as if they could see everything around them perfectly. I'm a biologist, and I'm very familiar with the behavior of all known large animals in North America. What we saw on the screen didn't match any description. They weren't bears, and they weren't people. Their size and manner of movement ruled out that possibility. "We need to get closer," Mike said, and decided to lower our altitude to 300 feet. The Argus's propellers ran almost silently, but at that altitude, in the stillness of the night, they could still be heard. It was a risk, but curiosity and professional passion got the better of us. Mike carefully lowered the drone, following the group. The image became clearer. Now we could make out their limbs. Long, powerful arms that hung down almost to their knees. Large heads. They walked slowly, and their movements revealed a frightening economy of energy characteristic of large predators. At one point, the leader stopped and picked up something long from the ground. In the thermal imager's glow, it looked like a dark, cold object. He struck the trunk of a fallen tree, blocking their path with it several times, and then tossed it aside. We were witnessing something that shouldn't have existed, a population of giant bipedal primates unknown to science. In the forests of North America, that sounded like the ravings of a madman. Suddenly, one of the creatures in the middle of the group stopped abruptly and raised its head. It froze, and its thermal silhouette on the screen remained motionless like a statue. It was looking straight up at the spot where our drone was hovering above it. A chill ran down my spine. It couldn't see it, and from that height, it couldn't hear it either, but it was looking directly at it, and a second later it made a sound. We couldn't hear it, but we saw a small cloud of warm air escape from its head, and the whole group stopped immediately. They all froze, as if on command, and began to slowly raise their heads. We realized they'd spotted us. Mike's face was pale in the light of the monitor. How the hell did they spot us? Before I could answer, the leader, the one with the stick, took a step to the side, bent down, and picked something up off the ground. His movement was quick and sharp. And in the next second, something dark and cold flew across the screen, straight at the camera. The image jerked, distorted for a second due to interference, and then the screen went dark. "Signal lost," the message flashed in red letters. We sat in complete silence for several minutes, staring at the black screen. Outside, the generator hummed quietly, but it felt as if I had gone deaf. "A rock hit the propeller," he stated matter-of-factly. We both understood. They hadn't just spotted the drone, they'd shot it down, from a height of 300 feet at night with a single precise throw, and now they knew we were here, just 5 miles from our camp. We sat in the tent for about 20 minutes without saying a word. Every rustle outside, every crack of a branch in the woods, which had previously been nothing more than background noise, now sounded like harbingers of danger. The sound of the running generator was no longer reassuring. On the contrary, it seemed like a treacherous beacon, giving away our location to whatever was lurking in the darkness. Mike was the first to break the silence. "We need to get that," he said, without looking at me, his gaze fixed on the blank screen. Or rather, what's left of it, the memory card. "Jeff, do you realize what was on that recording?" I knew. A few minutes of thermal imaging footage capturing a group of gigantic creatures unknown to science. It was the most important scientific discovery in a long time. I didn't even know what to compare it to, and at the same time, it was the most terrifying sight I'd ever seen in my life. "They're 5 miles away from us, Mike. They know we're here. We're not going out there at night. That's suicide. They might be gone by morning," he countered. "Or even worse, they might find the drone before we do. Destroy it. That memory card is protected, but not against physical destruction." We argued in whispers for about another hour. Fear clashed within us with our professional duty and our thirst for knowledge. In the end, we came to the only sensible decision: to wait until dawn. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat with a bear-repellent flare gun in my hands, while Mike kept a large hunting knife at the ready. We turned off the generator, plunging the tent into complete darkness and silence, and simply listened. The forest went about its usual business, but for us, it had changed forever. I heard heavy footsteps somewhere far beyond the range of my hearing, and the quiet hum of the wind was actually someone's breathing. It was an irrational primal fear that sent chills down my spine. As soon as the first gray rays of dawn broke through the treetops, we were ready. We took only the bare essentials with us: water, a first aid kit, a GPS navigator with the latest coordinates for Argus, and my 12-gauge shotgun, which I always brought along on long expeditions. We moved quickly, and as quietly as possible, constantly glancing over our shoulders. The forest, which had seemed majestic and beautiful to me just yesterday, now looked like a labyrinth full of deadly traps. Every shadow seemed like a figure, every fallen tree trunk a predator lying in wait. After 2 hours of trekking through rough terrain, we reached the foot of the ridge where we'd lost the drone. And there, for the first time, we saw their tracks. They were enormous. Each footprint was at least 20 inches long and sank 3 inches deep into the damp earth. The shape was almost human, with 5 broad toes, but the proportions were different. The heel was wider, and the arch of the foot was practically flat. The toes fanned out, as if the creature needed maximum support on the soft ground. I dropped to my knees to get a closer look at one of the tracks. It gave off a faint but distinct odor, a sharp, musky stench, a mixture of wet dog, rotting leaves, and something else. Something animalistic and completely unfamiliar. Mike silently photographed the track from every angle. It led up the slope, exactly in the direction the group was moving on the thermal imaging screen, and we followed it. The higher we climbed, the more signs of their presence we found. Branches on the trees were snapped off at a height of 10 to 12 feet, as if someone very tall had knocked them aside as they passed by. The trunks of several pine trees bore deep scratches, apparently made not by claws, but by something like rough nails. We found the spot where they had stopped to rest. Gnawed deer bones lay scattered on the ground, and several ribs and a shin bone had been snapped in half with an ease that no predator in these woods known to me is capable of. Mike picked up a piece of the skull. Look, it was broken with a single blow. My throat tightened. The navigator showed that we were less than 100 yards from our target. We slowed our pace, making our way from tree to tree, trying not to make a sound, and finally we saw it. Argus lay in a small rocky clearing, or rather, what was left of it. The carbon fiber hull was smashed to smithereens. The beams with the propellers had been torn off and flung aside. The camera had been ripped from its mounts, and the lens was shattered into pieces. It didn't look like the damage was caused by a crash. Most likely, it had been methodically and brutally destroyed. It had been smashed against the rocks over and over again until it turned into a pile of debris. Mike and I froze, staring at the scene. And then I noticed something else. The memory card slot on the central unit had been forced open. It wasn't just damaged. It looked as if it had been gnawed through or cut open with something sharp. It was empty, and the memory card was gone. They took it. Mike's voice was barely audible. It was the most absurd and terrifying thought. An animal wouldn't have carried off a small piece of plastic. It would have torn the drone to pieces and left. But the card was gone. At that moment, I felt that we had made a terrible mistake by coming here. This was no longer just observation. It was an invasion of their territory. I slowly looked up from the drone's wreckage and surveyed the surroundings. The clearing where we stood wasn't just a random patch of forest. On one side, it was framed by cliffs with shallow caves visible in them. And on the other side, I noticed something that looked like structures. They were primitive shelters built from fallen trees, interwoven with thick branches and covered with fir boughs. There were 3 or 4 of them. They resembled giant huts or nests. Next to one of them, I spotted a pile of bones, much larger than the one we'd found earlier. There were stones there as well. Dozens of smooth river stones of various sizes, stacked neatly as if it were an ammunition depot. We had found their lair and were standing right in the middle of it. Suddenly, the silence of the forest was broken by a sound coming from somewhere above, from the slope of the ridge. It was neither a roar nor a scream, but a deep guttural sound, like a long sigh, yet so powerful that it seemed to make the air vibrate. It rolled through the gorge, and a few seconds later, another similar sound answered it from the other side, somewhere beyond the rocks. They were talking to each other, and I had no doubt what they were saying. Let's go, let's retreat, right now. Drop everything. Mike didn't need any convincing. Slowly, without turning our backs on our cover, we began to retreat. Every step felt like an eternity. I kept my eyes fixed on the dark openings of their dwellings, expecting a huge figure to appear there at any moment. We retreated until we were hidden behind the trees, and then we ran. We ran without looking where we were going, leaping over fallen tree trunks, pushing through the bushes, ignoring the branches lashing our faces. We didn't stop until we reached our camp. Without saying a word, we began frantically taking down the tent and stuffing our gear into our backpacks. 20 minutes later, we were walking toward our car, which we'd left a few miles away. I didn't look back, but I could feel with every fiber of my being that we were being watched. We were leaving their territory, and they were letting us go. But we were taking with us the knowledge of what we had seen there. And that knowledge weighed heavier than any backpack. The walk back from the forest was marked by an oppressive silence. The gravel driveway gave way to a paved road, and the dense thickets gave way to scattered farmhouses. But the oppressive feeling wouldn't go away. We sat in the car, covered in mud and scrapes, staring straight ahead. I gripped the steering wheel tightly while Mike looked out the window. We didn't discuss what we'd seen. We didn't even discuss what we were going to say. There was no need. The lies came naturally, born of a shared primal fear of being ridiculed, fired, or worse yet, sent for a psychiatric evaluation. When we returned to our sector's base, we looked like 2 beaten-up dogs. The chief, an old grump named Henderson, glanced at us and asked where the drone was. Mike's voice was steady and weary as he recited the prepared story. We got caught in a downdraft near the ridge. Argus spun out of control and we couldn't stabilize it. It crashed somewhere in the gorge. We searched for it for several hours. but the terrain is too rugged, with nearly vertical cliffs. Without special equipment, it's impossible to find the wreckage. Henderson shook his head and clicked his tongue, lamenting the loss of equipment worth as much as his house. But he didn't seem surprised. That's just how mountains are. Equipment breaks down, and the wind can be treacherous. He made us fill out a pile of paperwork, including an incident report, an equipment write-off form, and explanatory notes. Every word I put down on paper felt like a desecration of the truth. Cause of the incident: equipment failure due to extreme weather conditions. I signed the document, feeling like a traitor, not to the Park Service, but to myself. The next few days flew by in a blur. We were sent on forced leave until the internal investigation was completed. I tried to live a normal life. I went to the store, watched TV, chatted with my neighbors, but it all felt like mere background noise. Reality remained out there, in the forest. At night, I'd wake up at the slightest noise, and it seemed to me that I could hear that deep, guttural scream. During the day, looking at the trees in my backyard, I found myself instinctively estimating their height, comparing it to the numbers I'd seen on the screen. I no longer felt safe. The world was no longer the familiar, understandable place it had been. I knew what lay hidden behind the thin veil of civilization, in places we arrogantly considered explored and mapped. On the 5th day, Mike called. "Come over right now, I've got something." He lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, and his entire basement had been converted into a workshop and server room. When I arrived, he was sitting in front of 3 monitors displaying lines of code. The air smelled of ozone and hot plastic. I lied to Henderson not only about the wind. I told him we hadn't been able to find the wreckage, but I didn't tell him that Argus had been transmitting data right up until the very last moment. Not a video stream, but telemetry, data packets containing information about the system's status, altitude, speed, and temperature. It was sending them via a satellite channel to my personal backup server every second. Most of the packets were corrupted after the crash, but I spent the whole night trying to extract whatever I could from the wreckage. Mike pointed to the central monitor. It displayed a 3D model of the terrain, including that very slope and the drone's flight path, ending with a red dot. He had reconstructed the last 3 seconds of the flight, along with a few frames from the onboard camera. Not the thermal camera, but the regular one. The resolution is terrible, 1 frame per second. But take a look. A blurry, pixelated image appeared on the screen. A forest, rocks, and a shadow. A huge, dark shadow that took up almost half the frame. In the next second, the shadow twitched, and something small and dark shot out of it. The frame changed. The dark spot grew larger, and the next frame was nothing but static. "It's a rock," I said, even though it was obvious. "And that's it?" "Exactly," Mike nodded. "I miscalculated. Knowing the drone's weight, the altitude, and the speed at which the rock was flying, I calculated the approximate force of the throw. Jeff, not a single person on the planet, not even an Olympic hammer thrower, is capable of that. Physically incapable. Muscles and bones couldn't withstand that kind of strain. This was proof, not just an observation, but cold, irrefutable numbers. But that's not all. Now listen, Mike switched to another program, an audio editor with a long audio track. Argus's microphones are always on, recording ambient sounds to get the full picture. I cleaned up the recording to remove the noise from the propellers and the wind. Here's the sound we heard before we were shot down. He pressed the play button. The same deep, vibrating, guttural scream came from the speakers. Even on the recording, it sent chills down his spine. It sounded once, then, after a pause, a second time, a little farther away. "And now," Mike said, his eyes sparkling, "I'm going to run this through a spectrograph and filter out the frequencies audible to the human ear." He pressed a few keys. The audio waveform on the screen changed, and where there had previously been an almost straight line, complex repeating patterns appeared. But when he played it back again, no sound came from the speakers. But the signal level indicator jumped, showing that there was sound after all. "What's that?" I asked. "Infrasound," Mike replied. "They communicate at frequencies below 20 Hz. We only heard the tip of the iceberg, the loudest, most audible part of their speech. The main conversation was happening where we couldn't hear it. It's like with whales or elephants. They can communicate over enormous distances. Remember how they all froze at the same time and looked up? The one who spotted us didn't shout. He gave a command. A silent command. I stared at the quietly flashing indicator and felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. This changed everything. These weren't just giant monkeys. This species had a well-developed communication system, which pointed to its social nature. And we had invaded their territory with a humming vehicle, eavesdropping on them. To them, we weren't just a nuisance, we were a threat. "We need to get back," Mike said quietly but firmly. I looked at him as if he were crazy. "Are you out of your mind? They almost killed us. They shot down the drone, found it, smashed it, and, most importantly, took the memory card. They realized it was an eye and took it. We can't go back there. That's exactly why we have to." His voice grew sharp. "This isn't just the discovery of a new species, Jeff. This might be first contact. We need to figure out who they are, how intelligent they are. I'll put together new equipment, directional microphones, seismographs, and cameras with passive infrared sensors. We'll take a different approach, no direct contact, only remote observation." I looked at his burning eyes, at the complex graphs on the monitor, and realized he'd already made up his mind. He was ready to risk everything for this knowledge. And I wanted only one thing, to forget. But as I looked at the dark window of his basement, I knew I could no longer do so. They were there, and now they knew as much about us as we knew about them. Our arguments went on for almost a week. We met every day, and every day Mike showed me new fragments of his analysis, new evidence that we were dealing not just with an unknown animal, but with something on an entirely different level. He discussed the complexity of their infrasonic communication, the mathematical precision of their throws, and their possible intelligence. His obsession grew, pushing fear aside. My fear, on the other hand, only intensified. I didn't recall the graphs on his monitor, but rather the empty memory card slot. The deer bones snapped in half, and the primal terror I had felt standing in the middle of their lair. For him, it was the most significant discovery in history. For me, it was a warning. We can't keep this a secret. We have to tell the world about it, but we need irrefutable evidence. Video, clear video, and a recording of their conversation. Otherwise, they'll lock us up in a mental institution. They destroyed the drone, Mike. They realized we were watching them. They won't just take out our equipment a second time. They'll come after us. But I could see that my words weren't convincing him. He was already there, his thoughts on that ridge, and he was already planning a new expedition. Finally, he said bluntly, "I'm going there with or without you. I can't pass this up, but I don't want to go alone." It was a blow below the belt. He'd been my partner for 12 years. We'd frozen together in tents, fought our way through blizzards, and fended off bears. I couldn't let him go alone, so I agreed. But I set my own conditions. This would be the last trip, and no drones, no active pursuit. We'll set up camp at a safe distance, install stationary passive sensors and cameras, and get the hell out of there. Then we'll analyze the data and decide what to do next. He reluctantly agreed. 2 weeks later, we returned to Pisgah. This time we approached from the other side, from the west, choosing as our observation point a high, rocky ridge that offered a view of the entire valley, where, according to our calculations, their main territory was located. It was at least 3 miles from there to their lair. We spent the whole day setting up the equipment. Mike had brought an entire arsenal with him. 2 high-resolution cameras with huge telephoto lenses, a seismic sensor capable of detecting the footsteps of a large animal from a mile away, and most importantly, a parabolic microphone that could focus on a sound source at a great distance. We camouflaged everything to match the color of the rocks and foliage and waited. Nothing happened for the first 2 days. The seismograph remained silent, and the microphone picked up nothing but the sound of the wind. I hoped they had left, migrating to another area. But on the 3rd night, the seismograph came to life. It recorded faint but rhythmic vibrations emanating from the center of the valley. It didn't sound like footsteps. They were too measured, with precise intervals. At dawn, we aimed our cameras at the source of the vibrations and saw one of these creatures in the middle of a large clearing. Even from that distance, it seemed enormous. Its power was evident. It held a boulder the size of a car battery in its hands and methodically, with monstrous force, struck a tree trunk with it. We couldn't hear the sound, but we saw how each blow sent wood dust flying from the oak. And this wasn't senseless rage. There was a rhythm to it. 3 quick blows, a pause, then 2 long, drawn-out ones. Another pause, and then 3 quick ones again. A minute later, a reply came from the forest. The same guttural cry we'd heard last time. They were communicating with each other using that drum. It was their system of communication. We sat by the cameras until evening, watching them. We saw them moving through the valley. We saw 2 of them work together to fell a small tree so they could cross a ravine, and we also witnessed a larger individual teaching a younger one to strip bark from trees to get to the larvae. It was a social, organized way of life, complex and completely incomprehensible to our perception. Mike was thrilled. He was recording everything, and his laptops were filling up with gigabytes of data, but he was dissatisfied with the sound quality. The wind was causing too much interference. "I need to lower the microphone," he said on the evening of the third day. "Just for a couple of hours, right at the edge of the forest. I'll set up a standalone voice recorder, and we'll pick it up before we leave. They won't even notice us." I was categorically against it. It was madness, a violation of our main rule, to keep our distance. But he was adamant. "Jeff, this is the most important part. Their language. We have to record it clearly." I gave in. I don't even know why. Maybe his confidence rubbed off on me, or maybe I was just tired of arguing. Under the cover of the deepening twilight, we began our descent. We left everything unnecessary at the summit, taking with us only a microphone, a tripod, a voice recorder, and my rifle. We moved slowly, stepping from rock to rock, trying not to make a sound. The forest at the foot of the ridge greeted us with a cold, damp silence. We set up the microphone, pointing it toward the clearing where we'd seen the drummer earlier that day. Mike fiddled with the wires while I stood on the running board, peering into the inky darkness between the trees. And that's when I heard a twig snap right nearby. We froze, my heart sinking into my heels. I slowly raised my rifle. A figure emerged from behind the trunk of a giant tulip tree. It wasn't as massive as the one that had been pounding on the oak, but it still towered over us by 8 feet. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring at us. In the dim light, I couldn't make out its face. Only a dark, massive silhouette and 2 faint glimmers where its eyes should have been. Curiosity, that's what I sensed in its posture. Not aggression, but pure animal curiosity. It took one slow, almost silent step toward us and made a quiet, gurgling sound from deep within its chest. Mike, as if spellbound, slowly began to raise the small camera hanging around his neck. That movement, that gesture, changed everything. The creature's posture instantly became threatening. It stood up to its full, enormous height, and a roar erupted from its chest. But not the guttural cry we'd heard before, rather a deafening, primal scream of rage and power that seemed to shake the very trees. It paralyzed us, robbing us of our will and ability to think. The creature crouched down and lunged at us. Time seemed to stretch out. I saw its massive body hurtling toward us and realized that it wasn't going to kill us. It was going to wipe us off the face of the earth, drive us out of its territory. Instinct proved stronger than fear. I shoved Mike, snapping him out of his stupor, and at the same time squeezed the trigger of the pepper spray canister. A cloud of orange gas hit the creature right in the face. Its roar gave way to a scream of pain and rage. It stopped, shaking its head and rubbing its eyes. That gave us a few seconds. "Run!" I shouted, and we ran. We scrambled up the slope, clinging to roots and rocks, not daring to look back. We could hear it growling below us, trees snapping. We rushed back to our camp, grabbed only our laptops with the data and our backpacks with water, and vanished into the night. We ran for several hours until we came upon the access road where we'd left our car. We drove away and never returned. A week later, in that same basement, we silently formatted all the hard drives. All the records, all the charts, all the photographs, everything was destroyed. Mike never mentioned that astonishing discovery again. He had seen the same thing I had. We weren't looking at an animal. We caught a glimpse of another world, existing parallel to ours, hidden in the forests. A world ready to defend itself. And we realized that our discovery would bring not knowledge, but only death. Hunters, the military, corporations, they would have turned that forest into a war zone. They would have destroyed them, and we made the right decision. We decided to protect them by keeping silent. A month later, I quit the National Park Service, and Mike and I are no longer in touch. Our friendship, like our scientific curiosity, was trampled in that clearing. Sometimes I see news reports about missing hikers in the Appalachians, and my heart sinks. I know no one would believe my story. I wouldn't have believed it myself until I looked into that creature's eyes. There was neither malice nor hatred in them, only an understanding, as ancient as the mountains themselves, that we are strangers on its land, and that there are places where people aren't welcome.